Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out Podcast, a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations, to follow their dreams of career fulfillment, and to live their best, most authentic lives. I'm your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast couldn't be possible without the support of Career Minds. Today, I am incredibly excited to welcome Rasagna Holt. Rasagna is the founder and CEO of KG Tiger, a minority women-owned business that enables organizations to become truly global businesses. Her company's innovative platform integrates all aspects of workforce management, from recruiting to payroll processing. Rasagna has such an interesting journey that started in India at the age of 16 when her father asked her two simple questions. Do you want to get married and start a family here in India? Or would you want to move to the United States to pursue your dreams and your career? She obviously chose the latter and packed up her bags as a teenager and moved to the US. Rasagna and I met over 7 years ago when she was launching her company, KG Tiger. She was recently recognized in the Inc. 5000 and was recognized as the fastest growing company. I'm just delighted to share her story with you today. So without further ado, please enjoy Rasagna Holt and her clocking out story. Rasagna, hi, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Raymond. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited for our discussion today. I was thinking back, Rasagna, that it's 2017 when you and I met. It's over 7 years ago when you reached out and you were just starting KG Tiger. And I felt like you were, like you had all these great ideas and you were launching your company. And our initial conversation was a partnership. Our companies both sell into the human resources field. And we were talking about partnership ideas. And it's interesting. We had all these great ideas, and I felt like it never really came to fruition, which is fine. And then here we are last year. I was like, I was involved in the Philadelphia 100, and I saw that you were recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in the region. And I just said to myself, wait, I remember meeting Rasagna back in 2017 when we had this initial conversation about a partnership. And here you are, fastest growing company. So obviously things have been going really well. So congratulations, but just really excited to learn more about your story.
Oh, thank you, Raymond. Yes, 2017 seems like ages ago. I know, I remember that conversation very well. Things have evolved and changed significantly since 2017. I know we haven't partnered per se, but I think, we grew a friendship over the years and I learned a lot from you and what you did with Career Minds. So it was definitely a great 7 years sprint, I would say. And
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of things changed since we met in 2017, what the vision was for KG Tiger as to where we are today. And we had the phenomenal pandemic in the middle too. So that kind of shifted gears significantly for which direction we wanted to take. But very
Mm.
excited to be here. And yes, it was surprising that we won, top 10 in Philadelphia 100, last year. That was very exciting. We also made Inc. 5000 3 times in a row. And every time we grew almost 500 ranks. So that was also very exciting. So I think
Mm.
I'd say we're in a very great place now. And hopefully, next few years will be as good as the first 7 years.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there's no linear path to success. I can't wait to hear about some of your journey. So, Rasagna, one of the things that our listeners love about the podcast is to know a little bit about your personal story. And what I'd love to do is kind of start from the beginning, share with us, where'd you grow up, maybe a little bit about your parents, siblings, and we'll go from there.
Great, yes. So I grew up in India. Both my parents are from India. My father was a doctor, and my mother was a dean for a university. I have a younger brother who's a year younger to me. And we grew up in a very small rural village in India. You would be surprised if you see my hometown
Mm.
that I came from there. Um, growing up, my parents always wanted us to focus on education. Education was very strong in our family. We had to be either an engineer or a doctor or something of that sort. So very early on, my younger brother and I were like, okay, being a doctor will take us so many years to be a doctor, but let's choose engineering so it'll be fast. And we were both very good at math. So that's how my journey started. When I was in my teenage, and my parents were like, "Okay, you have two choices. Would you like to get married and settle down, or would you like to go to the U.S. and pursue your education?" So the choice was super easy. I didn't want to get married, so I decided to come to the U.S. And So I came here, did my engineering, and my life kind of changed significantly. Until that time, it was super sheltered. My parents were taking care of everything. They were paying for all the fees and all of that. And all of a sudden, you're in a completely different country, trying to figure out how to live the life and also pay for your school fees, because my parents were not wealthy. We came from a middle class family, enough for us to eat and, like, take care of our family, but not necessarily fund and foreign education. So that was a very hard transition at one point in time.
So I think your story is super interesting. And I wonder if you can share. I think that conversation that you had with your father, where he asked the question about whether do you want to get married or do you want to go to the US? Like you said it, it's so matter of fact, almost as if it's just like you're having a dinner conversation. And I just don't think that many people are presented with an opportunity like that, where it's like, hey, do you want to get married or do you want to move outside the country to pursue your career? And I just wonder how old you are. And in retrospect, like as you sit here today and you think about the path that you chose, what did you learn from that?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I was 16 years old, and basically, typically, if you, the area where I grew up, it's a very conservative. I come from a very orthodox Brahmin family where women basically don't necessarily go pursue huge careers or huge education. So you have this choice of whether you want to settle down and have a family, raise your kids, or do you want to pursue education? So my mother was an anomaly. So she had a PhD. She became a dean for a university. So she chose a path that not normally all women choose, especially from the background that I came from. So at that point of time, at 16, it was a decision that you have to make for your career progression, whether you want to pursue higher education or you want to settle down and have kids. So, unlike other parents, my parents did not decide it for me, but they gave me the opportunity to decide which direction that I want to go. And I was so young at the time, like marriage was not, I wasn't even thinking what I was choosing, honestly. And I definitely knew that I didn't want to get married. So the other choice was to pursue education. So
Hmm.
I decided to take that path.
So I'm curious if people at 16 years old, though, is it pretty common that women would get married at such a young age?
So at least they choose their path. So for example, like, at that age you decide whether you want to pursue a doctor's medical degree or engineering, or you want to complete just like a bachelor's in science or bachelor's in commerce, which is only a 2 years or a 3 years program. And typically if you choose that path, you get married earlier. You don't necessarily pursue huge dreams, and you're more like a homemaker at that point. So
Hmm.
that was kind of like a decision point in most students' life where you decide which direction you want to go.
So it sounds like your mom having her PhD and being a professional, so to speak, really sort of influenced your decision. Both your parents were professionals, and my sense is that you knew early on that you wanted to be a professional yourself, go to school, and postpone getting married and starting a family until much later. And so it sounds like you chose the path to move to the United States. Did your parents stay behind and you went by yourself?
Yes, I was basically, I think youngest of all our cousins who went to the U.S. at that time, and basically it was a huge, huge first step, and this is my first time getting on an airplane. I never saw a plane in my life at that time, so it was
Wow.
a completely crazy experience. My parents never traveled either, so I only knew the small town that I grew up in, and all of a sudden you're transported into a completely different culture and different country, and obviously your mother tongue is not spoken here too, so you're completely speaking in English, and people were way taller than you are, so it was a
Mm,
very huge cultural shock for me. So since I was very young, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always saw that there was value in building something of your own. Even though my mother was a huge influence in my life, she was not just a dean for a university. My mother was always pursuing other careers, like so much more focus on entrepreneurship. She would teach outside of her college time. Like she would go and she would have tutoring services where she would teach other students in the evening in the house. And she was also a musician, so she was a musical artist, and she would have a band, and they would travel from like city to city, and they would perform at different weddings and temples and stuff. So I saw all of that growing up. Like it was never like, hey, you get a 9 to 5 job and that's how your life is going to be. It's about how can you build something for yourself, like besides your regular 9 to 5 job, which is used for paying bills. So it was always there in our, upbringing that, it's way more than a 9 to 5 job. So it was
mm,
always very influential in that sense. So definitely my mother played a very significant role in molding who I turned out to be as I got older.
mm. So, where did you settle when you moved to the United States? And was there a point where you got homesick and you said to yourself, I want to move back home?
Well, I never thought that I should move back home, because as soon as I landed here, I knew the land was full of opportunity, and there was so much more that I saw here than I saw growing up in India. I thought there was, somebody who is very hardworking and focused. I think America is the best place to be. And I identified that very young, that, hey, if you want to achieve your dreams and become big, then this is the place to be. Homesick, of course, like there was so many times, Raymond, you have to understand, like, kids growing up in India are very, very spoiled.
Mm,
I never saw a kitchen in my entire life until I came to the US. We grew up with maids, and we grew up with chefs, and somebody else did your laundry. So that was a huge cultural shock for me. Now I got to do my laundry and I have to cook for myself. And it's the whole transition from being so sheltered into becoming a grown up was very, very hard.
mm,
I think kids here are prepared well, way better prepared to face the adulthood than people from India. So that was very hard. Obviously, I missed my parents and my cousins and my culture. I miss spending time with my grandmother. So definitely that part of life was missing, because I was alone and by myself, and there was no family surrounding me. So that was a huge drawback. But other than that, like, I made great friends, I learned new culture. I was very interested in exploring, what the whole future has for me. So I was very young, and I was like a sponge, trying to absorb as much as I can from a different culture.
mm. And what city did you end up moving to?
I moved to Syracuse in the beginning, stayed there for a few. It was extremely cold. And then I have some cousins in Pennsylvania who said it's much more warmer than Syracuse is. So I applied for Villanova University, got accepted, and I moved to Villanova from Syracuse.
Nice.
But yeah, definitely, I have seen snow in my life. Yes.
Mm.
So that was, yeah.
So you mentioned entrepreneurship, and as you're progressing through high school and you're thinking about college, at what point did you kind of narrow in on your degree, and what was going to be your study, and how would um, you kind of think about applying that to the workforce?
So growing up, I was always very good in math. Like, math was super easy for me. It was second nature to me. I didn't have to work hard at all, and it came so easy for me. I always knew that I don't want to be a doctor. My father is a doctor, and I did not want to be a doctor. That's something that I chose not to be from the beginning. So the obvious second choice for us was basically becoming an engineer. And my parents are again came from a lower middle class family, so I want to make sure the cheapest path possible to get to the next level was always our first priority. So that's how I ended up in math field and engineering field. But soon I realized that this was not my cup of tea. I couldn't see myself like drawing bridges and trying to figure out how to build stuff. That was not me. So I feel like I had a career ADD. So I kind of navigated through different aspects. I went through computer science. I worked in computer science and coding for a little bit, with my engineering for a little bit. But neither one of them were my calling. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I saw so much more purpose to myself than just sitting in front of a computer and coding all day long. So, I decided that I want to start something by myself, and when the opportunity came up, I took it and I started building on it.
Mm. So let's unpack that for a second. It seems like so you graduated with your degree, and what was your degree in when you finished school?
Undergrad was in mechanical engineering. Then I did my master's in computer science and an MBA in finance. I did not complete my MBA in finance. I stopped in the last semester because my son was born at that time.
So you were starting a family, but you entered the corporate world. You started working in a job, a 9 to 5 job. How did that work out? And when did you realize that working in corporate was not going to be like working in that 9 to 5 type of position wasn't going to be suitable for you and your career?
I was very young. I actually was enjoying the fact that I was making good money and like spending time with my friends and spending some money to my family. I was in a good place financially at the time, but I always felt like it was not good enough. Like I always had that emptiness inside that there's only going to be a cap as to where you will grow in a corporate job, or you can never um, impact or influence people or leave an impact behind. For me it was always about the legacy that I leave behind after me, so that
Mm,
always bothered me. And I never wanted to be just a number. And I felt like there is always a purpose, that every human being is born and we got to find out what that purpose was. So I was not happy, like in a sense I was lost, and I was trying to find myself and what is the right thing for me to do. And that lasted for almost 6 or 7 years that I spent in corporate life.
I can only imagine you were a teenager, you left India, you settled in the United States, you're learning, new culture, you are trying to figure out your identity and your place in the world. And I would imagine that there was some struggle that you went through to kind of figure that out. You joined the corporate world. When you think back, Rasagna, were there insecurities that you had to overcome with who you are, and then also what was your identity going to be in in your career?
Absolutely. I think the biggest challenge for me was to culturally fit in first. I grew up in a very conservative Orthodox family, and kind of coming out of that shell and trying to fit in this culture, which is very, very social, very open. And, that was hard for me. And I'm naturally an introvert, not necessarily an extrovert. So making friends is not easy for me. I mean, I talk to everybody, but not necessarily make friends. So trying to navigate that was very hard. How do you make friends? What are your common, I didn't grow up here, so I don't know the culture here. So there were so many references that I don't understand, and it was so hard for me to trying to understand the culture here and then try to fit into it. So that was a struggle in the beginning, to try to find my place. When I realized that basically, okay, it's okay not to fit in, and you could always build your own lane, and that's totally fine. It felt much more easier to navigate the culture,
Hmm.
but that took me some age and some maturity to get to that point where it's okay to be you, and you don't have to fit into those blocks that everybody has to fit in.
I have to say that's so inspiring because you're how you describe just having to fit in. You're someone who is an immigrant moving to the United States to sort of um, follow your dream, right? And the fact that you said early on, I want to be an entrepreneur. When you're an entrepreneur, you not only you have to be more than just fitting in. You have to have the ability to um, you have a dream and you have ideas around the career and the future you want to build, the company that you want to build. And as someone who's starting their career as an entrepreneur, once you get, it's so important that you're comfortable with your identity and you have to fit in because ultimately you're going to need people to follow you. When you're creating an idea and coming up with an idea and going to market with a new idea as an entrepreneur, it's so important that you're comfortable with who you are as a person because you're going to have people to follow you. And I think it's so inspiring that it sounded like you really achieved that. And you were kind of figuring things out, working in a job, a 9 to 5 job for 6 years. And I wonder if you can share what was that moment when you decided that it was time to make a shift and you were going to lean into this kind of entrepreneurial spirit and take yourself to the next level.
There is no one moment, Raymond, because it was more of circumstances for me.
Mm,
Like sometimes you, the nature forces you to do things that you have been thinking about, but you haven't made the move yet, and that's exactly what happened with me. I remember I quit my job in 2012 April. Ari, my older son, was born in 2011 August, and I knew that basically just staying home and taking care of the kids was not my calling. And, I was not, we are not financially there yet to start a large business. So I was like, okay, I don't want to sit home and just take care of the kids. I want to do something more impactful, but I don't want to spend a lot of money in starting my business either. So what do I have and what are my qualities or what do I bring to the table that I can piggyback on and use as less as possible as an investment and start something so I can, take care of my kids and also, impact other lives. So that's where the whole thought process started. And, then I decided that, okay, these are my characteristics, these are my skill set, and this is who I can approach. These are my networks. And let's start there. So that's how I got into the entrepreneurship, even though it's always your calling. Sometimes like the nature has to force you into it, and that's exactly what happened with me.
mm. So it sounded like, I have to say, again, it's so matter of fact. You had kids, and it sounded like you already knew that you weren't going to be a stay at home mom, or you were going to pursue your passion, your career. Was there a struggle with that decision, or did you just sort of know right away that you had this dream that you were going to follow and you were going to make it work where you had home care and nannies and things like that to help with things around the house?
But so it's weird. When I talk to some of my friends and stuff, like growing up, they always had dreams of like nice white picket fences and a beautiful house and a dog and 3 kids. My dreams was always about the concrete buildings. I always used to look at these large offices, and I used to think, oh my god, one day I want to own a house office like that. I want to have
Mm,
500 people that I can employ and support. And I always thought I was so weird in dreaming like that. And I would never share this with anybody other than my younger brother, who is a very close friend of mine. So at that time, so for me, it was natural. Like I never thought that I mean, I love being a mother, I love having kids and the family life. But for me, it was always, hey, I want to be a business owner. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to impact way more than my own personal bubble and, help as many families as possible. That was my forefront always. So it was super natural for me. It was a natural progression for me to get into entrepreneurship. I never thought that I was just going to stay home. I always thought it was a temporary thing. And it was just like a step up to get into the what I really wanted to do.
mm. So did you have sort of a dream of something already in your mind that you wanted to pursue, in terms of entrepreneurship? What was the big idea at that time that you felt like you wanted to build?
So I really wanted to, I realized that basically being an immigrant from a different country and seeing different cultures, I thought there was always an opportunity
Mm,
for bringing services from outside of United States into the U.S.
mm,
I thought that there was so much knowledge gaps and basically what do you say, expertise gaps in the US that you can fill with folks from other countries who already have that proficiency or vice versa. So having that international exposure, I always looked for opportunities where there could be some outsourcing. They could be, basically skills that you don't have here that can be found in other countries. So I always thought that there was an opportunity for a global business. So that was my vision always, is to be able to provide a global platform for people to work from anywhere and support any country. I started off very, very small. Obviously, I had to start somewhere. So I realized that, okay, I'm good in math. I have a finance background and I also worked in life sciences. And this is the network that I have. So, what can I use from my skill set in my network to start something? So that's how all of it began. It was not a plan. I did not know if that was the right direction for me, but that was what I had in my hand. So I took the pawns that I had in my hand, and I built a strategy as to how do I build a business from here. So I reached out to my networks and I said, listen, I have this background, so I can totally screen your candidates for these technical skills or these life sciences skills or these finance skills. Let me do the pre-interviewing. I know you guys are spending so much time in interviewing these candidates. I can prep these candidates and give you, finally prepped, interviewed candidates for selection. So a couple of people took chances with me. I would bill them hourly. I would pre-screen the candidates. I pre-qualify them. I source them, and I present them to the clients, and they would hire them. So it started off slowly by finding people and presenting them to the clients. Then I got into staff aug, where I was placing contractors in life sciences and technology, and that grew slowly and became KG Tiger in 2017.
wow. So you were a global recruiting company essentially, where you were helping large organizations fill openings, requirements for open positions, but you were not just focused in the United States, but it sounds like you were recruiting globally and leveraging your global network in order to build business.
That's right. Yes, that's how. That's where we were different. Like you will find a lot of recruiting firms in India, or you will find recruiting firms in Asia, or in US, or in Europe, but you don't see firms that are basically working in a global scale in multi languages and supporting in different regions. So that's where I saw the value at. And if a client chooses us and brings on board, they don't have to go find another firm to help them in a different country. So we kind of gave that solution where it doesn't matter which country, which time zone you are, and which language you want the recruiters to speak, we can provide those resources for you. So that's how we started off with KG Tiger being a global talent acquisition partner. And
Mm,
we also focused on not filling the jobs. It was never about, hey, fees per hire. It was more about a strategy and a plan and a project. So I'm not just taking one ups and two ups, but I'm actually building a strategy for you to expand into a different country, or do 20 hires in 6 months, or go to China and find people in 1.5 years. So those are the kind of projects we picked and chose. And we definitely wanted to build a niche as to how we want to help our clients.
mm. So how did you come up with KG Tiger? That's an interesting name.
Actually, the name it came from my partner. He loves pun, and he loves pun with the words. So he wanted to be. He came up with this word cagey, like a tiger that is caged and ready to pounce and hunt for the talent. So that's how the name of cagey tiger came out.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's interesting. It's like the candidates are caged tigers that you're recruiting out of their company. And it's almost like they're in a cage and probably not loving their work and you're pulling them from one cage to another. I love that. Well, no, actually, you're not. You're pulling them from a cage and you're setting them free.
I'm free, yes.
I love that. That's
We're
great.
helping them find the right jobs, basically.
I love that. That's great. So, Rasagna, I'm wondering if you can share, since starting KG Tiger, what would you say has been one of your biggest challenges that you've had to overcome?
I think if I could speak for pandemic, like it was really really hard. We started growing slowly. We were a young company. We started in 2017 November, only 2.5 years, and we got stuck with this pandemic. I remember getting phone calls from all of our clients say we got to put this on pause. We cannot, go ahead continue the project. Let's see what happens. This was March of 2020, and pretty much every single client stopped. So
Hmm.
here I have at that time about 45 employees, and I was like, okay, we don't know what we're doing. How much money do we have in the bank? How long can we sustain this? Because with no, we don't even know when the business will open up or what we're dealing with. So my finance team came back and said, okay, we have 6 months worth of reserves. If we cut down our costs this much, if not, we'll only last for 3 months or whatever the different permutations and combinations that they gave us. So I went back to my team and I said, listen, if we all took 25% cut in our pay, we can last for 6 months and see how the market takes us and how we can evolve from it. So my entire team stood with me and they said, okay, definitely, let's do that. So we all took, well, I didn't take any salary at that time. So I made sure my team got 25% less than what they were taking. And we continued, figuring out how to go about next. Luckily, things, opened up internationally. That's when people realized that, okay, we can work from home, that technologies evolved and, remote work became a common thing. So that kind of opened up floodgates for us internationally. So if you can find people, you're a New York company and you can find people in Alabama, why can't you find people in Africa or in Philippines?
I have to say, first of all, your leadership with um, recognizing that the pandemic was going to hinder the business and the fact that you're not taking a salary and you aligned with the team to get their commitment to see it through the pandemic to allow KG Tiger to thrive on the other side, I think is admirable. And um, I can only imagine that it grew the culture stronger and really connected everyone on the pathway. And it feels like after the pandemic, um, the opportunities for KG Tiger were endless. And kudos to you for trying to figure out what that was going to look like. I think oftentimes, through that time, people probably had to do lots of layoffs, and it sounded like you were creative in sort of figuring out, let's get through this as a team, and it paid off. And so I love that story. So I have to ask this question. I want to go back for a moment around the comment that you made about not taking a salary. I, as someone who's listening and they're working in a 9 to 5 job and they have a full salary and they have benefits, you obviously have a family, and so many people later in their career do have families, and you started a family. And I wonder, how did you survive with not taking a salary? And in those early days when things are just getting started, how were you able to make ends meet? And do you have any advice for people who are looking to start their own business where they need to earn a paycheck?
Oh God, this is, it's very very hard, Raymond. Like I would say, entrepreneurship is not for people who have thin skin. You absolutely have to have a thick skin and make choices that are very tough. Um, you're lucky that I'm in the U.S. and there's so many benefits, even though you come from a lower income. And below the poverty line, there are opportunities for you to at least feed your kids in this country. But when you're from a different country, it's even more hard.
Hmm.
It was all about choices, for me in the beginning. And I remember staying in a single bedroom apartment with three kids and trying to figure out how to make ends meet and still have food on the table and also build a company. So those were definitely some tough choices. But, you know, I would say throughout my life, I always had to make tough choices. Even when I was in college trying to pay for the tuition, I remember because my parents couldn't send any money, like, so now you have about $50,000 worth of school fees that you have to pay. You don't have a legal license to work in the United States. Nobody will lend you money in the US. So, how exactly are you planning on paying $50,000 a year? So you got to figure out creative ways. Like, I remember eating in the library leftover foods from different conferences and stuff. They would leave, some salads or anything, and I would just go pick them up and save them so I can eat for the week. I remember choosing between buying a train pass or walking to the school because, I didn't have money. So I used to buy a train pass this month. That means the next month I can eat. So it was very, very hard choices in life that you had to make. But at the end of the day, all these sacrifices mean something, and you just get stronger. And when you see rock bottom, I think there's only one way, and it is up. So
Mm.
you'll figure it out, and you'll be way more creative when you're put in a corner. So
Wow.
yeah, so it was tough, and again, entrepreneurship is not for everybody, and it's not as glorified as Shark Tank shows us. There's so many tough choices,
Yeah,
especially
they
when you have.
send. Yeah, they sensationalize the whole entrepreneurship journey, and you only see the success moments, right? So you mentioned Shark Tank when you're raising money and you have this big idea, and you're seeing the end of the success of them, in their business, and they get the check for $100,000, and I love that story around the sacrifices that you've made. And I think that people who have a big idea and are willing to make that choice and make the leap of faith have to recognize that you have to make sacrifices early on. And it sounds like you made some significant sacrifices that, as you look back and think about the sacrifices that you've made and you're sort of playing it forward to where you are today, it has absolutely made you a stronger person. And it impacts the decisions you make as a company. And so I appreciate you sharing that story.
Of course. I think it's a typical immigrant mentality, Raymond. It was always about how your next generation should be better than your generation. And that was kind of instilled in our brains and upbringing. My parents sent us here because they thought we will have a better life here than they had in the US. The same thing with my grandparents, probably sent them to college thinking that they would have a better life than them. So that kind of carries on with you. And, in your first generation immigrant like myself, I always wanted to have something from give my kids, something they can remember me by after I pass on, or that so they can share to their kids and beyond their kids, right? So it was kind of like a mindset that you have from the beginning that you,
Mm,
you you don't have choice. You always take the next step up, not go behind.
I love that. And you mentioned KG Tiger earlier, and you said your co founder came up with the name, but I can only help but sort of think about like you, 16 years old, living in India in this small town. It's almost like you were a caged tiger to some
Oh,
degree that needed to be set free. And your parents recognize that you were a talented young girl that had an amazing future. And so it's almost like they opened the gate and
set
allowed
you
you
free.
to, yeah, they set you free. And you are, um, I think your story is so inspiring. And I think that young women who have a dream, who want to start their own company, particularly if they're here in the United States from another country and they're feeling like they're not worthy, or they are still struggling with that identity and trying to figure out their place in the world, that, I think that you give a lot of people hope.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. It was a lot more easier for me when I was growing up. There was not this much amount of social media influence, and like there's no Instagram and Twitter happening at that time. So it was, staying in that lane and being focused was much more easier. Now, for my kids' generation, I feel like it is so scary. Like, the being able to fit in or trying to follow a trend, is like a huge thing in this culture. And
Mm,
everybody likes to follow instead of building their own paths. So I always have this conversation, especially with my daughter. And I explain to her it's okay to be different. It's okay to have your own path. You don't have to follow. You don't have to wear the same clothes that everybody wears or go to the same places that everybody else goes. But it's hard for young people today to even think that they can do something outside the box because
mm,
they're going to be scrutinized so much on social
mm.
media.
I love that advice. I think that's fantastic. And I am so appreciative of our friendship. It's been 7 years, and I know that you and I have, talked more today, and we collaborate a lot on each other's businesses and support one another. So I really appreciate that. Rasagna, what's the best way people can find you and your company?
Yes, I am very active on LinkedIn. Basically, and my website is www.kgtiger.com, and my email address is rholt@kgtiger.com. So I'm very accessible through email and also through LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. I loved our conversation. Really appreciate you carving out some time here today to share your amazing journey with everyone. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. And yeah, I really appreciate all that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Raymond. I do appreciate our friendship too, and thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and career development services. If you'd like to connect with me about your own career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, as well as find me on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future and think it's time for a change, I would encourage you to ask yourself these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.